So this is the second of the sessions that I'm doing. I think it's going to probably end up being sort of 7 or so sessions in this initial intake, but it depends how we get on, depends how popular they are, depends if I need a break at any point. So we're going to be looking at energy envelopes and what uses energy initially, and then we're going to move on to rest and its role in post-exertional malaise, and look at relaxation. So that just gives a little bit of sort of overview. We may touch on the dangers of exercise and doing too much. It might not quite manage to cover that today, but it can fit into another session if need be. So when we talk about energy envelopes, now I did the graphics here, it's not very clear, but that is an envelope. And these images kind of represent activities and the amount of energy they might take. So you can see here, showering takes a big chunk of energy. The top middle picture, that's somebody worrying. The top right is someone checking emails, and then it's making food and eating food. So this is not sort of untypical of somebody who's got bad post-exertional malaise and is struggling quite a lot. This might be the extent of what they could do without overextending themselves and using more energy than they have. So you can see this sort of idea of this is roughly how much energy somebody might have in a day and how much certain tasks take. You can see that there's gaps in the envelope where they might be able to do tasks, but it has to be the right sort of task to fit into that space. They might need to rearrange things in terms of when they do them for it to fit in. It might be, depending on the person, a physical task might take a lot more energy, so they'd struggle to fit that in, but they could fit in a mental task. It'd be quite different. And this is an example is that if somebody then did more than they should, and they did more than they had the energy for, then they could experience post-exertional malaise. And as well as that being unpleasant, they could also find for future days that the envelope might shrink. So you can see here, the envelope's a bit smaller than it was in the previous image. And also some tasks when someone is fatigued might become more fatiguing. So in this case, showering could barely fit into the envelope. So you can see in this sort of situation, you can't sort of safely do what you could do the day before as a result of overextending. So in this case, a shower would probably need to be forgoed. So that sort of simple sort of idea of the energy envelope is that we all, when we have post-exertional malaise, we have a limited amount of energy that we can spend in a day. Different tasks and activities will use up different amounts of energy. And if we overextend ourselves and do more than we can safely do, we'll experience post-exertional malaise, and we can experience sort of less energy in future days. So there's lots of different analogies and ideas that we use within sort of the ME community and long COVID to look at how we sort of describe the sort of concept. So some use piggy banks, some use spoons. Within the MCAS community, buckets are a very sort of common analogy in terms of how much energy you've got and what happens when it's overfilled. I quite like the bank account analogy. So if you look at your sort of savings or whatever, if you overextend yourself, then you get overdraft charges. So not only do you have to make up what you'd lost and were behind from the previous sort of month, you're also getting charges. You look at a credit card, you're getting more charges, you're getting very, very high interest rates. Then if you extend your energy further, you might need a sort of a payday loan company. You might need, and that could be exorbitant rates that are very, very hard to pay off on top of still meeting your current costs, in extremes loan sharks. And it's all the sort of idea that you keep within your energy, you can do about the same, but the more you go over your energy levels, the worse the consequences can potentially be. So a key aspect of what we do when we're talking about pacing is kind of keeping within your energy envelope and trying not to overextend yourself, because the consequences can be severe. In some cases, it will be you experience symptoms that are unpleasant. I like the term post-exertional malaise, but it's much, much broader than that. It can encapsulate a wide range of symptoms: headaches, nausea, dizziness, pain, confusion, there's many different symptoms that people can experience. One of the most popular within the community way of sort of looking at sort of energy is in terms of spoon theory. And I've just taken this from Dysautonomia International. They kind of have used a simple sort of graphical way of explaining that. So you can imagine if you have, say, 12 spoons in a day, how are you going to use them? Spoon theory was created by Christine Miserando, and she was really trying to explain to a friend what it's like when you have an energy deficit, when you can't do as much as you want to do in the day, and how you have to make some very difficult choices. So, you know, it might be you need to get dressed, breakfast, wash, eat, do a little bit of work, and you can't do them all. You have to give up on some of the things that you really need to do because you just don't have the energy. Lots of different things can use up energy. I think it's easy to think of energy in terms of tasks that you do in a to-do list, but even passive activities, worrying about something can use energy. Digesting food can use energy. Broadly, I think we put it into sort of 4 main categories: sort of cognitive or thinking, emotional, feeling, and that can be happy thoughts as well. You can be happy about something, and that can be tiring. Physical, obviously, moving around, and social, sharing, you know, talking to other people, being in a sociable situation. But it varies very differently from person to person. So I've met and spoke with lots of people who experience post-exertional malaise. In some cases, it's almost entirely cognitive activities that cause post-exertional malaise, and physically they can do what they want. For others, it's the opposite. Some people can have stressors, and so if they don't get much sleep, the symptoms can be much worse. They can be much more sensitive. There's a lot of variation from person to person and what energy you've got, and equally, and the consequences are if you overextend yourselves. If I overextend myself in a given day, it might take me 6 months to recover from it. It might be a week, it might be a day, but it can be, it has been as long as 6 months before. So I have to be very careful in what I do to make sure I stay within my energy limits, or at least I don't go too far over. And a lot of what you're having to do with pacing is kind of realize what your consequences are, because we're all quite different in that regard when we experience post-exertional malaise, and how much we can kind of go over our limits, and how much that will affect us both in terms of symptoms and in terms of whether we will find, like in that example of the envelopes before, we get a smaller envelope the next day or a few weeks afterwards, and that can vary massively from person to person. So I want to touch on some of the things that can increase or make the energy using more significant. So if you're doing an activity and you've already used up most of your spoons for the day, then it's likely that activity will take more out of you. Broadly speaking, though, we are looking at sort of duration of an activity and the intensity of it. So a gentle walk might be okay for somebody to do that for 5 minutes, but a 5-minute run might be completely undoable, and equally walking for an hour might be completely impossible for somebody without incredibly severe consequences. Environmental factors can make a big difference. If you're sound sensitive like I am and in a noisy environment, that can make it much worse. Other health issues can also make a difference. So in my case, I have dysautonomia. So if I'm standing, then that is going to make anything a lot more fatiguing. And some people can be quite stress sensitive. That can, if they're experiencing stress, that can make every activity they do a lot more tiring. But there's a wide range of stressors that will vary from person to person. You kind of have to learn and find your own, and know when you're experiencing those, or those are present, to just watch what you do. If you've rested before or after activity, it can massively change how fatiguing it is, or what the sort of long-term impacts of doing it are. And I've found for myself, multitasking is exhausting, and doing multiple types of activities at the same time. So for instance, if I was walking somewhere but I didn't know where I was going, having to plan a route, that would be incredibly fatiguing for me. And for a lot of people, that can be a lot more tiring than they would have otherwise thought. That's given a broad, very simple overview of sort of energy. It's something I'm going to be coming back to and covering again in the future, but I just wanted to start that up when we're looking at rest, because it's easy. When I started off pacing, I went to my occupational therapist, and I'd been doing activity diaries, and I went along and could see big patches of green where I'd been sort of resting, and then she kind of interrogated me and found out what I'm doing, saying, "Oh no, that's not rest." Because I kind of thought if I was just sitting on the sofa watching TV or checking emails, that was kind of rest. And it can vary a lot from person to person what counts as rest. But it's often not what you think it is, particularly if you're thinking what you found was restful for you before you became ill. Some of the advantages of rest is that obviously if we don't have a lot of energy, any time we spend doing activities could be using up that energy and shrinking what we've got. So time when you're resting, you're not depleting your energy reserves. But for a lot of us, high quality rest can actually increase our energy reserves. It can reduce the post-exertional malaise symptoms we're experiencing, and it can actually give us more energy. And there are some feelings that sort of rest is one of the best things that you can do to assist in having the best chance of recovering from ME or long COVID, that it can sort of lead to sort of give your body a chance to sort of heal itself. There's not as much evidence around that as perhaps it could be, because it's very hard to do research into that sort of thing, and it's maybe been underlooked. But rest does seem to make and play a really, really important role, both getting a lot of rest generally and having periods of high quality rest. So I want to kind of cover 6 tips or 6 sort of aspects of rest, and there's a bonus one at the bottom for people who want to read ahead. So I've already captured a lot of what sort of rest is for you now, and you kind of need to find out what good quality rest is for you now, and it can vary from person to person. So for me, I need to be lying down. It needs to be not overly bright. It's very hard to rest well if there's somebody else in the room. There can't be a lot of background noise. I am very sound sensitive, so we do sort of vary then. I can't be thinking about things. And that's not just like bad sort of thoughts. It's not like trying to solve the world's problems. It can just be, you know, half an hour ago I was reading a book, I'm just thinking about the ending or thinking about the book. And it can be I'm thinking what I need to do the next day. It can be anything like that. And the more that I'm actively thinking about something, or even passively thinking about something, the more that can kind of get in the way of rest. So actually getting, for me, and for many of us, high quality rest is a lot more tricky than it first appears. I do want to sort of highlight, this was something again that my OT made a big sort of point of when I started out, was that rest isn't always about quantity. It's much more about the quality of rest you get. So a rest of 10 minutes, of 20 minutes, if it's high quality rest, that could be really, really helpful. Rest don't always need to be for long periods. They can be if you've overdone it the day before, or you're feeling exhausted and you need to rest, then, you know, listen to your body and get the rest you need. But rest doesn't always need to be for really long periods. The next sort of point I'd make, because this is something I was told, and I think most people are told when they start pacing, is to schedule regular rests. So in my case, I have a rest in the morning, a rest in the afternoon, and a rest in the evening, and that's every day, depending on how well I am, and how generally, and on what I've done in the day. The periods can be different. They can be as short as 10-15 minutes, or as long as 45 or so. And this isn't a case of I've done an activity and I'm overtired. This is a case of these are planned rests that I have. Sometimes I have a phase-in period because it's hard to just do a job and then stop and rest, or I can't anyway. I need to kind of phase into the rest, to do more light activities, things, sometimes listen to music, something that leads me sort of into the rest. And I really recommend it and exploring trying this. It can vary from person to person. You might find it doesn't work for you, but it's an easy way of, in my case, I find it increases the amount of energy, the amount of things I can do in the day, and it can seem paradoxical to actually book it in time where you're not doing anything, that can actually increase how much you can do. But I found that to be the case for me, and lots of people do as well. And it's very easy if you don't schedule a rest period for it just not to happen. Other sort of with rest is try to do it before and after activities, particularly activities that you find use up a lot of energy. And if at all possible, if you can break up activities to have a rest partway through, that's even better. I'll touch more on that probably later. The next sort of thing I want to sort of go over is that rest is not the same as sleep. Now, I think quite a lot of the medical professionals could be a little bit sort of puritanical about this. I think good sleep hygiene is good. If you've done too much and are exhausted and need to sleep, then you kind of listen to your body and sleep. But that might be indicative that you've done too much in the past. If you've done so much that then you're just sort of sleeping in the day where you wouldn't otherwise be sleeping. I personally find if I end up sleeping during the day, I don't get the same sort of recharge in energy that I would if I was actually getting quality rest. But sometimes I need to because I've overdone it. It doesn't happen very often. It does happen quite a bit with, I've sort of said that as well as post-exertion malaise, I also have dysautonomia. And I find if I have to spend lots of time sitting or standing, then a few hours later, I find it very, very hard to stay awake. And it's not really to do with experiencing post-exertion malaise. It's kind of like a separate thing. But that's sort of the case with me. And then the sleep seems to help. So just sort of bear in mind that sleeping is not necessarily the same as rest, but you've kind of got to listen to your own body and see what helps and doesn't help you. And that's the sort of final sort of point on sort of rest, that over time you do need to listen to yourself and see, are you getting the rest that you need? Is it helping you the way it needs to? And the bonus at the bottom there, that's just it's a bit of a more advanced concept. If you do a task, say for an hour, and then afterwards you feel a bit worn out, then next time you're doing something similar, try to stop 10-20 minutes before then and rest, even a short rest like 5-10 minutes before resuming, and just see if that makes a difference, because preemptive rest can be a very powerful tool in your sort of arsenal for reducing your symptoms and increasing what you can do. Now, in terms of whether a rest is recuperative, hopefully you should be able to feel symptoms slightly less afterwards. So if you had a headache, that might be less pronounced. You might feel you've got a bit more energy. When you're doing things, you might seem to be able to do them without tiring so quickly. I find a higher quality of rest, the more recuperative it is. So high quality rest of half an hour might be the same as 3 hours of not as focused rest. And I might intend on resting, but get distracted, check an email, check a Facebook message, put some music on that's not particularly restful, that I might be singing along to, whatever. 3 hours have passed, and I actually feel no better than I did when I started. It can be quite a lot of effort or focus to get good quality rest. So for me, it's lying down, no social interaction, not checking messages, not any sound sources, not thinking about things, even fun things, not planning, not worrying, no strong emotions or distractions. So that's how it is for me. And you kind of need to learn, if you don't know already, what it is for you. I will sort of stress that there's a lot of barriers to rest, and they can vary from person to person. There can be a lot of internal resistance. I've heard a lot of times people say rest is boring. Now, for me, I find rest actually quite magical. The idea that I can do something and I get less symptoms and I can do more, it can really be amazing. But I think quite often when people say rest is boring, sometimes, yes, rest can be boring. You're not doing things you want to do, but also there can be a lot of internal resistance going on where you're challenging and resisting that this is something that you actually need to do to help you. and accept that need, and also accept that you're worth that need. Because it's very easy to think of all the people you promise you do things for, all your family, all your work commitments, all your other commitments, and just think, actually, you know, I need to focus on that and not focus on yourself. But if you don't get enough rest, it can be that your health gets worse. You become less able to do things, become more dependent on others. So this internal resistance, which isn't present for all of us, but could be present for you, it's really worth overcoming. And internal barriers aren't necessarily actual resistance. They can just be habits. You know, people can habitually check their email messages. They can habitually do certain activities that might not be conducive with rest. There can be more challenging issues if someone's experiencing anxiety or stress. That's very hard to sort of turn off, and it can reduce the quality of rest that they're experiencing. And there's not a quick or easy solution to that. There are a lot of circumstantial and environmental challenges as well, which can be sort of noise from outside, light. If you've got chemical sensitivities, there could be chemicals in your house that are fatiguing you or making it hard for you to get good quality rest. I'm intolerant to vinegar, and once I had a cleaner come in and clean the house with vinegar, I didn't realize it. I was lying down, I was exhausted, and I just was getting more and more exhausted. Eventually, I can't remember if I went outside or I went somewhere else, and I slowly sort of felt better. But even lying down, I was sort of off, and I wasn't getting any better because there was environmental barriers to me getting sort of the rest that I needed. But it can be family. It can even be nice things. It can be, you know, someone asking if you want something from the shops or whatever. It can be quite hard to do, and I do think with family, it is a difficult challenge. And that goes for friends as well. Is making sure that people around you understand that you need rest periods at times. But sometimes, if they interrupt a rest period, it kind of, if it's 10, 15 minutes into the rest period, it might actually mean you don't get the benefits it needs. It's like having to restart the clock again. So it can mean getting those around us to understand, at least to some level, what our needs are so that they can be met. Relaxation activities are something that, if you're getting external support from an occupational therapist, from a nurse, or from many books out there around pacing, somewhere you'll see relaxation exercises, and it can feel a bit strange because it's like there's a lot of resistance within us, because quite often people are talking about our problems as though they're all in our heads, rather than a real physical issue. So it can be a bit puzzling to realize where relaxation exercises may or may not fit into things. And I would say with relaxation exercises, there's some of you here who will never need to do them. They won't be needed. And for others, they'll be essential. So some people find with the post-exertional malaise that they're very stress sensitive, tiny amounts of anxiety or stress in their lives, and it radically affects them in terms of their energy levels. If that is the case, then relaxation activities can lower your general stress levels and lower your susceptibility to stress. Also, there's an issue though that if we've looked at rest, and for a lot of us, rest can be, you know, being in silence, in a low stimulation environment. What can happen is that what we experience isn't always restful, because all the thoughts we've been blocking, all our anxieties, all our insecurities, they come to the fore. And sometimes it's not even as extreme as that. It can just be simply, you know, I'll come up with a project idea and I'll start planning that project. My mind will go racing and racing and busier. And it's actually quite fun and pleasant, but it's not restful. So relaxation activities can sometimes actually play a good role in phasing in the rest. And exactly what ones work for you will be very different. And partly it's a challenge of finding ones that work. So mainly these days, I use some music that's not very stimulating, not the sort of music I'd listen to much normally prior to being ill. But I find that's a good way quite often of phasing in the rest. And then afterwards, the music can be off and I can get good quality rest. But there is some music and sounds that I can have on, and they provide just enough activity or just enough for me to kind of draw my wandering mind towards, but I'm not then thinking about other things more. Um, I would sort of say the relaxation activities there, as much as there could be resistance to the rest, there can also be resistance to relaxation activities, particularly from those who are experiencing stress. Sometimes it can feel like it's a very different sort of thing than what you're used to. The language some people in these sort of videos and audios might use might be sort of language we don't necessarily feel comfortable with, but it can be enjoyable and it can be beneficial. And I do sort of recommend in early days, particularly when people are trying to get good quality rest, to try relaxation activities and exercises to see if they help them. You might find it's not for you, but it's worth giving a try. I will say though that quite often new activities don't count as being all that restful because it's a new experience. It can be strange, it can be stimulating, even when it's intended to be relaxing. So I kind of recommend slowly building an arsenal of resources that work well for you. And I think I don't want to talk too much longer, but I do sort of briefly want to touch on the dangers of exercise and overdoing it. We did sort of talk earlier about the energy envelope and how sometimes if you do more than you can do, your envelope can potentially shrink. You can do less the sort of next day and sort of beyond that. There's quite a lot of talk. A lot of people get a lot of medical people who will recommend exercise. And exercise is wonderful if you can do it. It can have lots of benefits. Deconditioning does have its dangers, but there's a lot of dangers linked with overexertion if you experience them. So even looking at long COVID in general, the research paper came out quite recently, I've got the link there, and it was suggesting that only about 0.82% of people with long COVID actually benefited from exercise. Now, there was a larger group that benefited in some ways and were worse in others, but about 70 to 80% were actually worse from doing exercise. World Physiotherapy also released a paper highlighting a lot of dangers and issues around sort of exercise, but really, if people are not careful, there are issues in terms of sort of respiratory, cardio issues, as well as issues on post-exertion malaise and dysautonomia. So that whilst quite often well-meaning, or maybe lots of well-meaning doctors and other medical professionals can recommend exercise and it can be beneficial, quite often the dangers of overexertion are not really sort of bought into what they're sort of thinking about. I know quite a few people with ME who were told to exercise or did pre exercise therapy, and their health went from just about managing part-time work in one case to being almost unable to leave her bed for 10 years, needing a lot of care and support. And many instances where people have tried to do too much and they've ended up, it's put the recovery back 5 years, 10 years or longer. So I'm not saying exercise is bad. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I just really want to highlight that there are some dangers and issues around exercise that aren't always really talked about. So just here's some sort of resources. Because it's been about 10 years since I had ME and needed to use relaxation exercises, so many of the resources are different now. And my best recommendation is that you gently explore and try what might work for you, and that you, if you're not sure, you in long COVID support, you could just ask for a recommendation of what other people use, because that will give you the best guidance on what could work for you. So some of the resources I like are kind of strange or a bit old-fashioned, and I wouldn't necessarily say they'd work for you. If you do find mindfulness helpful, Breathworks, which is a Greater Manchester-based organisation, they have a free mindfulness online course that anyone can register for. and it's got quite a lot of mindfulness resources there. Breathwork is an excellent organization. So that's something that I would recommend, even though mindfulness doesn't work for myself. But that is what I would sort of say now. I'm going to end the screen share now because I can't see anyone when I'm sharing screen. But my slides will be available in the group afterwards. I'm going to turn the recording off at this point.